Evening, everyone. Good evening and welcome to All Saints Church in Pasadena. My name is Tim Rich and my pronouns are he, him. I am the priest in charge here at All Saints. Lest you think that that's kind of a boastful title, that's actually the title in the Episcopal Church that I get. So take no boast from that. It's really a delight to open the space up and to have you all a part of it. This is a renaissance of sorts of something that used to be a feature at All Saints, where we would have pioneers and thought leaders here and engage in conversation, not just with this so-called parish community, but the wider community, so that we could learn together, listen together, and be together. So I am delighted to welcome you to our evening with Professor Crenshaw. Let me just say that Professor Crenshaw will be interviewed by Barbara Andrade Dubransky. Barbara has over 25 years of systems change and service integration experience in Los Angeles and Riverside counties. She has developed and implemented and led experiences all over the Southern California area, policy, systems change initiatives in the areas of education, healthcare, and social services. She led one of the earliest and largest investments in universal preschool in the country, informing public preschool and transitional kindergarten policy. Barbara has also led investments in areas such as public education and associated communication tools, hospital systems change, libraries, fatherhood engagement, transitions to kindergarten, quality improvements, and clinic-based pediatric care, early literacy service integrated with WIC, and efforts to address racial health disparities with a focus on promoting healthy births. Barbara has served periodically as an adjunct professor, teaching courses in social welfare policy, health and behavior health policy. It is my pleasure to invite Barbara Andrade Dubransky to the stage. Please welcome her, won't you? Now it's my good fortune to introduce to you Dr. Kimberlé W. Crenshaw, one of the most influential legal scholars and public intellectuals of our time. Yes, you want it? Yeah, you can applaud right there. Dr. Crenshaw's groundbreaking work has transformed the way we understand the intersection of race, gender, and power through her pioneering scholarship in civil rights, critical race theory, black feminist legal theory, and the law. She's here today because she has published a new book entitled Backtalker. Dr. Crenshaw moves beyond the classroom and courtroom to share the personal stories that shaped her lifelong commitment to justice. Through memoir, history, and cultural critique, she invites us to consider not only how systems of inequality endure, but how courage, truth-telling, and collective action can help transform those systems. Here at All Saints, we are committed to the ongoing work of becoming a beloved community of belonging, and we are so grateful for the opportunity to learn from one of the foremost voices challenging us to imagine and build a more just and compassionate world. Would you please join me in giving a warm welcome to Dr. Kimberlé W. Crenshaw.
Hi.
Hi.
Wow.
Would you like to start with the reading?
Oh, okay.
All right.
Yeah. So first of all, good evening, everyone. Yeah, so good to see all of you. And I'm really delighted to be here and knowing the history of some of the people who have spoken from this space. I am exceptionally honored to be here. And it's great I'm kind of home. So, you never know if your hometown is going to come out to see you. So this is really exciting. So I'm going to attempt to read. I told Bert that I left my glasses, and he offered me his, but they weren't cute enough. So we'll see what happens. Okay. Yeah, Bert, I should have taken you up on that. Okay, before we get started, I have to make a confession. Being a backtalker is like being lactose intolerant. There are some things that I cannot digest. To accept anything close to second-class status as the price of belonging sickens me. I learned this the hard way during my first year at Harvard Law School when I bent and scraped my way into voluntary humiliation. It happened at the Fly Club, the prestigious home of elite Harvard men, including former presidents, captains of industry, and sons of wealthy families. Ben, who was the first African-American member of this exclusive club and a study partner, invited me and Reese, the third member of our all-black study group, to join him to celebrate the end of our first semester. From what Reese and I had heard about the club's safari-decorated interiors and its exclusionary history, we both agreed that in the likely event that something unwelcoming occurred, we were not going to take any, and I'm not going to say the word because I'm in a pulpit. Our dignity was a non-negotiable condition of our presence in that space. Duly bonded, we arrived at the venue and knocked at the door to announce our arrival. Ben opened the door, but stepped outside, blocking our entry into the club. Assuming that this was the beginning of the indignities that we were not going to tolerate, Reese and I immediately assumed the trigger position, arms crossed and brows furrowed. Our friend, sensing our readiness to rumble, sought to de-escalate the situation with what he thought was a minor detail. "Oh, it's not what you think. I just forgot to mention that Kim needs to go around to the back door," he explained. "Women aren't permitted to enter through the front door." In my mind, whether the back door treatment was because I was a woman or because I was a black person made no difference in our mutual defense pact. But for Reese, solidarity applied only to the things that were going to affect us both in the same way. Presumably, racial exclusion of both of us fit the bill, but the gender exclusion of me did not. Worse still, Reese and Ben plainly expected me not to make a scene. I stood momentarily frozen, both by the realization that they would not stand up for me to be treated as their equal, and by my own fear that they would judge me harshly for insisting that they do. Their plea for me to behave reflected a familiar expectation to pledge allegiance to a flag of solidarity that didn't pledge the same to me. A stronger me might have refused to dance to this unrelentingly asymmetrical tune. But at that point in my life, my commitments to the we ran deep, perhaps because there were only so many battles anyone could wage and still feel that she had a home. For whatever reason, I relented. I watched myself go around to the back door, consoled only by my insistence that they'd enter the back door with me. Entering that club on such terms was a fateful decision. Whatever I drank there that night made me violently ill. My head was spinning all night, and my churning stomach urged me to leave a token of my indignity all over the understated interiors of the club's game room. I managed to hold myself together long enough to stomp loudly down the stairs, out of the front door, slamming it so violently that I hoped it would break. Back in my dorm, I made a deal with the universe that if the room would just stop spinning, I would never again come close to imbibing what I consumed that night, physically, mentally, and emotionally. Perhaps because my humiliation that night was punctuated by physical illness, my resistance to asymmetrical solidarities is now fully reflexive. I cannot bring myself to ride and die for politics that won't ride and die for me. I've been called a public intellectual because I fashioned some words you may have heard about, like intersectionality and critical race theory. But if your vision of an intellectual brings to mind the thinker's pose, one with chin in hand who per head writes down her epiphany, that's not me at all. My thinking starts from the bottom up, from interactions with people and experiences across my entire life that have made me feel some kind of way. It's a feeling that tells me to pay attention, to ask some questions, and to struggle to put into words something that needs to be said. That's what these stories are. Memory, of course, is faulty, and perspective further shades what any of us can reliably recall. I've been aided in reconstructing these stories by the faded handwriting in my childhood diaries, by the loopy cursive in my bank of journals, by yellowed clippings and scratchy recordings about events that I've been part of, and by walks down memory lane with many companions who are part of this journey. In the end, this book is not an argument, a treatise, or a defense of my life's work, but rather a set of stories about how I make sense of the life I've lived and the thinking that that life has inspired. The Fly Club episode has become my lodestar, the encounter that navigates my thinking, that disciplines my desire to be desired, to be part of the club, to be the belle of the ball. But there are times when I walk by the many fly clubs in my mind's eye that I catch a glimpse of my wannabe alter ego, the one who never regretted going through that back door, and has had many a great time being toasted by those who offered only conditional inclusion. As I gaze into the window of that alternate reality, feeling a momentary flight of indecision, I sometimes wonder whether the costs of backtalking are worth remaining on the outside looking in. And then my stomach churns, and I remember that the drinks in there suck anyway.
I love this because it's sort of like that's what's outside the tin and that's what you find inside, right? I mean, you just laid it out for us right in the beginning, that this comes from your life experience. And as I was reading this book, I had this moment where I realized this reminds me of something. And I realized whenever I read a book about a real girl, I'm gonna say girl, you start as a girl, and that is facing just amazing challenges, but tells the story in a way that shows vulnerability where I can feel like I'm there, I'm next to you, and then also just inspire me with the courage and ingenuity. And that's what this experience was. So I realized, I read it and I go, oh, I have a pantheon. It's like I read The Diary of Anne Frank over and over again, and Island of the Blue Dolphins, and I was like, and this is part of that pantheon.
Wow.
Yeah, it just,
Thank you.
I learned things about myself, you know? And I just wonder, do you have a pantheon? Do you have those touchstones that you go back to, that you read and tell you a little bit about who you are?
You know, the one that I remember the most, it's not a memoir, but it's a story about a little black girl written by Toni Morrison, The Bluest Eye. And you know, it's one of the most banned books, by the way. And I have to ask myself, what is in that book that is so dangerous? What does that book speak to? What story does it tell? That those who think that censorship is the way to create the world that they want, what is in there that unlocks something that they wouldn't want a girl like me to have? And so just, as Toni Morrison explained it, she wanted to tell a story about the confluence of all of these disempowering dynamics on the child least able to defend herself. She wanted to imagine that, tell that story, let that story speak from the deep, deep, deep subaltern. And recognizing that character and that desire, there's a little part of My Thorn Rosa that's a little bit about, what is the embodiment of the girl that everybody cares about, whose problems they try to solve, whose life they are invested in. What does that little girl look like? What can she expect from the people around her? So Toni's character in The Bluest Eye is the girl who imagined herself being valuable if she could only have blue eyes. Mm-hmm. I imagined myself as being valuable if I could be the princess. And when I arrived with my own soundtrack and with all the people following me and everybody cared about me because I was nice and I was lovable and I was beautiful, that was an aspiration that was immediately unwritten by the circumstance of what kind of girl I was. So The Bluest Eye has been a lodestar in a way for me, many others, of course, but that's the one where I said, oh, I get that. I know something about that. Mm-hmm. And so it's my hope, to be put in some of in the same conversations with some of the works that you said is a lot. But I do want people to recognize the stories, identify with them, or at least empathize with them, and then ask, so what is it about this feeling that I'm having that authoritarians don't want me to feel? Mm-hmm. Why don't they want me to feel this? Mm-hmm. Why are they trying to weaponize empathy? Of all things. And why aren't we up in arms about that? That's what I want people to think about.
Yeah, thank you so much. You recognize what you felt in The Bluest Eye. How did you know it was time for your memoir?
Oh my goodness, my publishers would say, can we answer that question, please? We don't know if she still has, figured it out. So there are a couple beginnings. One beginning was, and is, because I haven't finished this book, I'd been slated to do a book of all of my essays on intersectionality, and I was dragging my feet, because, first of all, they go back now 40 years. And just to publish them all in a book without any new soil being tilled, without any effort to, remaster these articles to use a musical, just felt like off to me. It felt like I'm just going to go waltzing into a house party with my own boombox. People are listening to different things. It's just a different world. So I couldn't figure out how to repackage them in a way that spoke to this moment. So I was not doing it. And at some point, it occurred to me that it might be helpful to write a prelude to the articles. Like, what was happening when I wrote Demarginalizing? What was in the legal culture? What was happening in anti-discrimination law? What kind of debates were we having? Because these articles are, in a way, transcripts of real encounters in critical legal studies, in critical race theory, all of these spaces. So I wanted to give people a flavor, a sense of what was happening. So I started writing some personal narrative. Well, I was a young, 25-year-old in critical legal studies, and this was, what my calling card was. When I talked, this is what I talked about. So I was writing these things and taking a long time to get done with them. And I had the occasion, to meet a fancy agent who knew nothing about me, but his daughter was impressed that he was at an event that I was speaking at, so she came with him. And it made him think, well, who is this person that my daughter cares about? We had this great conversation, and he gave me the question that a lot of publishers give academics, like, can you write for anybody other than the 200 people who typically read law review articles? And I said, I don't know, but I'll show you something that I'm...
Hold my beer.
Right.
Right?
Yeah. So I send these to him, and I said, look, these are already committed. They're going into, a collection of academic essays, but this will give you a flavor. And within 24 hours, he called me back and said, you are insane if you're going to put these stories in an academic text that, again, those same 200 people are going to read. You need to pull them out. And so that began the process of pulling out these stories from the articles that they were a preface for to freestanding stories. So that's sort of story number one. But as I was starting to write the book, we had the George Floyd, Breonna Taylor moment that came and went. And some part of its going away was made possible by the weaponization of some of my words to create this discourse of fear. And, the president actually said at some point that we might have to shed blood to rid the land of these ideas. Well, when you're watching that, it's horrifying enough if you generally believe in ideas. But when he's talking about your ideas and he's talking about shedding blood, you're like, what? How did this happen so quickly that ideas and frameworks that people were, using to demand justice and using to bring women into the conversation about anti-Black police violence, which is how intersectionality ended up being so much of a part of, 2020. When you see that and see too many people kind of shrugging their shoulders or saying, well, maybe we just need to pivot. And, these are people who are stakeholders in race and gender justice. They're people who I thought would say, okay, we're going to fight this. And instead they were like, I don't know. So it was kind of hard to write about Thorn Rosa when Fox News was talking about intersectionality like 1,600 times in 2 months. It felt a little bit like fiddling while Rome was burning. Mm-hmm. So I was like sort of out there in the mix, giving away books. We went on a 17-state banned book tour. Any chance I could get, going on these crazy shows saying that's not what critical race theory is. But at the end of the day, it occurred to me that one of the distortions that was doing an amazingly damaging amount of work was the idea that these were abstract concepts that were kind of put together in some laboratory somewhere. It almost had a Frankensteinian, dimension to it. And if that didn't work, they would say, they're un-American, they come from somewhere else. And if that didn't work, they would say it's divisive, it makes people feel bad. So it was all of this, we're going after these illegitimate ideas that have no place in American space. Mm-hmm. When in fact, these are stories that are as American as apple pie and as a lynching rope. Right? Mm-hmm. You don't have to go to some other country to think critically about racial power. You don't have to be born in some other place to actually have experienced it. And you don't have to, be a rocket scientist to know that we still live in the shadow of these things, even as we might not always have the vocabulary to articulate what it is. Mm-hmm. So I redoubled the effort to write the book because I realized that for people to understand what critical thinking about race was, they would have to see it in action. They would have to see it in stories that they might have experienced something like that, or they might have heard of something like that, or they just hear the story and they go, oh, that's not too cool. You know, so building from the human experience up to the articulation of it is effectively what I was, trying to do. And I put American memoir on it. I have to say that the European publishers were so unhappy about that, they took it out. So you can tell if you got a book printed here or there because it just says a memoir, But, I knew that it was going to be coming out in this period of time where, there was going to be a whole lot of, celebration about the American story. And those who are controlling that narrative are the same ones who would say this story is not an American story. So I wanted to stick American in there.
That's right. I'd love to go deeper into that because, here, you're laying out very well. We're having this crisis in our democracy, and we've had this historical crisis around racism and the results of racism. Not just racism itself, the impact of it. And, when Roxane Gay interviewed you, you laid out really well, those things are not separate. We can't have a democracy without addressing this. Can you talk to us about that?
Yeah. One of the consequences of our inability to connect the dots between the struggle for racial justice and the hard work in making this democracy work is that the attacks on racial justice are not often seen by those who are trying to defend the democracy as front and center in that effort. Yet, the reality is that this democracy has always faltered on that question. Who has the right to consider themselves a part, of this project? Whose exclusion is rationalized in such a way that it basically becomes cancerous, and it allows for the entire democracy, to be put on life support. There's a faction in this country from the very beginning that never wanted to share it with everybody. And they have been willing to take this country to the edge and over it in order to sustain their vision of what this project is. They have tried to break this country in the past. And in many ways, that is a history that is not robustly told. Consequently, there is illiteracy around the association of racial justice and democracy. When people think about the civil rights movement, it is a pro-democracy movement. It's not, as our critics often say, it's not special pleading. It's not special interest politics. The interest in removing the obstacles that have long been placed in the way of full participation are obstacles against democracy. It's not simply a special interest, unless you think democracy is a special interest, right? So, the current consequence, I think, of that understanding gap, that literacy gap, is that we can have conversations about authoritarianism happening right now. You can have, to the mat debates between people who say, it's not right to call it fascism because it's not what happened in Europe. And people fail to understand, number one, a lot of what happened in Europe was replicated on what was happening here. So that's one dot. that doesn't get connected. And the other one is just assuming that we can leave these questions of race and exclusion by the wayside and still appeal to some mass of people who will come forward to support the democracy but won't come forward to support the Voting Rights Act, or won't come forward to support everybody's right to be part of this democracy. So it is the Achilles heel of our pro-democracy progressive movement right now, that we haven't been able to tell a connected story about how that same faction over and over and over again, that the same folks who overthrew Reconstruction, the same folks who were behind massive resistance in Brown versus Board of Education, are the same folks right now who are making claims that our entire electoral system is compromised because the wrong people are participating in it. We've got to be able to tell a coherent story over time that has every historical receipt that allows people to see that we're not winning when we avoid the difficult topic. We only win through the difficult leaves and deal with the difficulty rather than trying to unwrite it and create a mythical path.
One way you unpack that in the book is throughout your life asking yourself the question, who is the we? I thought I knew who the we was, and then this happened, and then now I'm not so sure. And you know, at this church, we talk about Martin Luther King's beloved community, and that's what we're striving for. So we have this question of who is the we of us, and I just want to hear where you think we are in that right now, and where you think we have opportunities to grow the we, which is about growing courage, it's about growing knowledge, literacy, and the willingness not to leave people behind because you think you're going to get a little further ahead without that person.
Yeah. Someone asked me, that question in another setting, today. So part of what I trouble in the book, but never give up in the book, is this notion of we that is striving. That hasn't arrived yet, but we are going, right? We are moving. What is now is not all that is meant to be. What we have been born into is not all that we have a right to. And that sense of we, my version of it, my articulation of it comes from the 60s. It comes from the 70s. I write about how my parents and their parents were race men and women of the 20th century, which meant being fully aware of the constraints that are illegitimate and never bowing to them, never accepting them, as legitimate, being aware that they may impact us, but being prepared for the moment in which we are able to break through. So that constraint and transcendence requires a subject in it. And that subject, was my family, it was my community, it was all of us who, were born, as I often say, I was born in a state of unfreedom. I was born before the Civil Rights Acts of the 1960s. I was born before some of the Supreme Court decisions that actually, made the promise real. So being born in that moment, but striving for and believing in the possibility of something else was my sense of what we were doing, right? And so I had a very, I was committed to that. That's partly why the Fly Club was so traumatic, because I was like, what happened, to the we? So it was a very, strong orientation. So one might ask, why do you still hold on to this notion of a we? Because I have story after story about going into a situation thinking we, and seeing the fracturing of that we, and seeing the consequences of it not being sustainable in some of the most important political moments in our time. The whole Clarence Thomas, Anita Hill part of it is telling a story of, if we had been able to sustain a commitment to the race, gender, class momentum that held this constituency together, that effectively defeated Bork, if we'd been able to hold a we in the Black community that said not only was lynching a problem, but so was the sexual abuse and harassment of Black women, which is something that we've experienced since we arrived on these shores. So if we'd had a robust notion of the we would not have had that fifth vote on the Supreme Court that gave us the end of meaningful campaign finance reform, that gutted the Voting Rights Act, that allows police unlimited power, that we're now seeing play out in ICE. There's so many different things that might have been different had that we held true. So, do I give up on the we? I do not give up on the we. I believe that there are ways of articulating what a common human forward set of interests look like. I believe that there is power in the collective. There is power in the collective, not just of those of us living, but those of us past and those of us in the future. I believe that if we are to survive as humans, we have to have a sense of the we. So it's not as though it is prefab. It's not as though just, being born as a human or being born with certain skin or being born, and being assigned a particular gender. It's not just, you don't become a we just because of the fact that you exist. It is an action. It is a verb. It is something that we constantly are making and remaking, often against those who say, "What you mean we?" So we've got to have an answer to what we mean we. And part of my story is how I've gone about trying to sort out, what that verb is, what that practice is, in trying to move with a sense of we.
Yeah, thank you. That brings into, this pattern in the book where you have a life experience and then you're able to get yourself to a place where you can work it out. So the section on Girl State and Girls and Boys Nation, here you're grappling with your family is having their property stolen from them.
Yeah.
You are hearing this term, urban renewal, and you're working that out, and then you get yourself to Girl State and Girls and Boys Nation. And I'm just curious about what that taught you about how you were going to maneuver politically, like what it did to, you built your critique, on your way there, you worked it, you presented it there. What did you learn from that about how you were going to do this kind of work that you're doing? I mean, you're a teenager at this point.
Yeah. This is the first time I thought about the connection back to Thorn Rosa because, I felt deeply aggrieved by the fact that my community, the Black community that I was born and raised in, was made into a sacrificial lamb by the city fathers who were, trying to use urban renewal funds and highway funds to build an industrial park to bring, employers, to town. And it was a multi-year process of redlining, defunding, allowing property values to plummet, which is what markets can do, intentionally so that when my mother's property that she'd inherited from her father, she inherited 2 homes, an apartment building and an office building, they paid her pennies on the dollar. And this happened in more than 2,500 communities across the country, largely to poor, to black, to brown, to people with less power to protect their property interests than those who were more empowered to do it. So I was angry about it, and I said, I want to talk to somebody, right? So it was my little moment of, I'm just going to create this bill. I'm going to push it through Girls State. One of the things you get for being elected to the state office in Girls State, and this is kind of everywhere, you get to go meet your counterpart. Mm-hmm. So I thought I had the goods. I thought, I've got this bill, and the bill was basically to say that, the real cost of urban planning is often borne by those who didn't have the power to defend themselves, because it was costly to lose your property and have to now go and buy something else. And so they were able to do this stuff by just saying, we're going to make you bear the brunt of this project, rather than pay people for relocation, which is usually what they did with businesses. So I was seeing it as a problem of persuasion, a problem of, and that's what a 17-year-old, 17-year-old thinks, I've got the answer, right? and doesn't understand that they could have figured that out if they wanted to. It wasn't that they didn't have the answer. Mm-hmm. It's just that why should we pay these people for their property when we don't have to? That's how power works. Mm-hmm. So I think part of what was meaningful to me about it is there's both an up and there's a down. I guess the up was he had no good answer to why don't we do this, other than if we actually pay people what their property is worth, these projects will be too expensive and we can't do that. That's not a good answer, And so seeing a grown man say to this 17-year-old something that was just a non-starter made me realize that adults don't have all the answers. It made me realize that a lot of what we experience is not the product of logic, clearly not the product of fairness. I got a window into what power just looks like. We don't have to be rational. We don't have to be fair. We don't have to make it make sense. We can just do it. And so, in a way, that was an epiphany for me, and liberating to a certain extent, because the worst thing is to think that things are the way they have to be. And that showed me things don't have to be that way. So it was kind of liberating in a certain way. On the other hand, I was bereft, because I was on this campaign, I was on this mission, to save my communities, and to win something for them, and not being able to do it was, in some ways really devastating. I eventually learned that, campaigns take many, many years, and sometimes they never win. You never know when they are, but that's not a reason not to do it. That's sort of the longer trajectory, of that. But it did, put me on the pathway to becoming a lawyer. It did put me in relationship with people that I've been friends with, for the rest of my life. I met Brian Stevenson, who is the amazing
playing the piano.
He plays the piano. He builds museums. He built a hotel. I'm actually going to do a week with him on Sunday, a literacy, leadership, and liberation week, in which we're framing it as a pilgrimage to the site of the civil rights movement. We want to touch the soil. We want to witness. We want to be in the artifacts. We want to learn how to read. I often say American society is a museum. We just don't know how to read it. We don't have the little cards underneath it. We're going there to learn the tools of being able to decipher, to understand, and then to take that back into our communities to do the same thing. I met Brian at Girls Boys Nation when we were both 17.
Yeah.
Both 17.
So it's a little bit of a term, but we just have to have a little celebration, an ode to Marion Crenshaw, right? So it's like a list. I don't want to give spoilers, but I'm going to say a little something to you, and then you can talk about any one of them that you want. There's the Firebrand, and there's the Melodica. Oh God, I love that one. And then the demanding that you were going to get the education that you deserved, the seeking justice for your brother, the plane ride to Cornell. I could go on and on, right? And I feel like she's just an example, the ingenuity that she was going to figure out how to make sure that nothing stopped you. And it was just absolutely beautiful. So, any of the stories you want to tell about her, but I also just wanted to ask, if she was here right now, what do you think she would say she wants for you right now?
Oh, golly. Probably rest.
I was thinking maybe.
That's probably what she would say. The one I'll say fully is different, but when I was supporting Anita Hill, I didn't tell her. I didn't have time, to tell her that I was getting on a plane and going to Washington, D.C. And for a whole lot of reasons, those of us who were in the back office supporting her were, recruited to come behind her and march into the hearing room with her. You guys ever remember the prize fighter who goes out and all his people are so we were kind of like those people for Anita. We go marching, into the Judiciary Committee. And my mother has the television on in her classroom. She was a school teacher for 50 years. And she wanted her students to watch this thing. And so, they're watching this thing, and one of her students said, "Miss Crenshaw, is that your daughter?" Right? And she says, "No, that can't be Kimberly." And she comes up and gets right into the television. And many of the kids told me, she said, "Kimberly!" That's how she would call me when I had done something. Of course she was concerned, what is happening? And, it was clear, I talk about this a little bit, that we were up against just every configuration of power you could imagine, so much that within maybe 2 hours of my showing up at the Capitol, they had identified me. They were telling stories about, this is critical legal studies. I was the only person in the whole team that had anything to do with critical legal studies. So it was telling us a lot about, what we were up against. But once I explained to my mother who Anita was and who Clarence Thomas was, she was 100%. That, at the end of the day, she had clearly the protective, orientation that any mother would have. And she was also a warrior. So if I would explain to her what the battle was, she would eventually say, "Okay, yeah, you gotta do it. Tell me what I can do." I didn't always appreciate her warrior, orientation. So I will tell this story because it shows how ignorant I was. So I left the school that she was teaching at, a junior high school neighborhood. It was called an inner city school, because if you're black and you live with other black people, it's called inner city, go figure. So I go to now a Catholic high school, and their tracks, honors, first, second, and we don't know what we're going to do with you, but we're going to give you a diploma. sort of fourth track, right? And so, and this is how people are sorted. So I get to the school and I'm basically on the track just above vocational. It's not even college prep. And I'm there with a good friend of mine. We both came out of our school. And we were talking on the phone about what a good time we were going to have. Because all of the books were books that we had studied the year before. The assignments we'd already done. We were like, oh my goodness, we are not going to have to do anything but party the entire time. We were like, all that. So my mother overheard this, and I didn't pay any attention to who she was. I don't know why. I don't know why. So the next day, I'm sitting in my, what was it, social studies class. And I love this class because you could take a test over and over again until you got an A. It was all multiple choice. It was like, oh, okay, this is it. And I'm just stretched out, enjoying myself. I am in high school. Life is fine. And I hear my name over the loudspeaker, please come down. And I'm like, what'd I do this time? I, didn't remember doing anything, maybe. So I go down to the principal's office, and the secretary, even she was kind of nervous. She said, oh, they're waiting for you. Go on in there. And I go in, and, I come, from the back, and I see my mother sitting there. She's got all her prim and proper, her wig is on and everything. And she says, sit. And I'm like, well, what did I do? And she has brought a folder of all my work from the last year to give it to the principal, Sister Magnus. And effectively, she was, demanding summary judgment. She was lawyering to say she has done all of this work. She has gotten A's on all of this work. She does not belong where you have her. She needs to be put in honors right away. And, Sister Magnus, tried to negotiate with her. Well, let's see how she does. And my mom said, I don't think you heard me correctly. And I'm slinking in my chair like, oh, God, no, right? And she delivers this line, that stuck with me forever. She said, your job is to stay out of her way. Mm-hmm. And I'm like, who's she talking about? Like, me. And she kind of laid out, and my job is to come here every time I have to when you forget what your job is. Mm-hmm. That was my mom. And, she said, and you don't want me coming back here. Do we understand each other? And, next day, I was out of my track and in the honors. And the reason why I share this one is, so much of parenting often involves doing things that aren't popular with your children. Mm-hmm. I was not happy. I was like complaining, like, do you know, we have to write essays every week? That's so unfair. I thought that I was, fighting the good fight not to have to write an essay. My stupid behind didn't realize you've got to write essays to learn how to write. You need to learn how to write to do well in college. You need to do well in college to do all these things you want to do. So she was able to clear out the way for me, push me on the path even sometimes when I didn't want to, and love me through that, And so, yeah, Marion, this book is really a book about Marion Crenshaw, how she survived, how she was a conduit from her parents to me, and, she's the original Backtalker. And you know what? I do want to say, my best friend growing up in Canton, Ohio is here somewhere. Where is she?
Did I see
Tina
a wave right
Meeks?
here?
My mom was a musician, a music teacher. She had just a gift for developing the talent of people who could sing. I unfortunately was not one of those people. Well, my best friend Tina was, and she followed them throughout their career. Always, tough love, but creative and supportive. That's the kind of gift that she brought into the world.
Yeah, thank you. I think you've kind of touched a little bit on she's doing all this in the context of just tremendous loss that the two of you are experiencing. And you go on to do work that we call Say Her Name. And you talked about the loss, that mothers of girls who were being murdered extrajudiciously, get that word out of my mouth. And that term, loss, is just so impactful. And it made me wonder about your experience of loss. You and your mom continuing to walk together through such loss, and if you feel comfortable talking about the meaning of the, Say Her Name and what you experienced.
And it was only while I was on book tour, actually, that I connected why I felt so connected to the mothers of Say Her Name. Actually, even reading it myself, I'm seeing connections that are not there. So we, and this is my organization, the African American Policy Forum, had been doing town halls all across the country to allow women and girls of color to speak to their communities about some of the issues that they were facing, in part as an additive or corrective to many of the town halls and blue ribbon reports that dealt with racial injustice but focused exclusively on young men. And while we thought that work was important and participated and held it up, there were also stories that were not being told. There was vulnerability that wasn't being acknowledged. So out of some of these town halls, we started hearing stories about Black women who were killed by the police that nobody knew. Nobody knew these names. People weren't marching. People weren't including them in the names that were, and it gave some of the families the impression that their loved one was singularly problematic. There must be something wrong with our loved one because women don't get killed by the police. And it turned out that even they moved in shame around the fact that they had a mother or a daughter or a sister who was killed by the police. So we were talking about this and trying to include it in many of these town halls. And then Mike Brown happened. He was killed. And a lot of our energies and efforts to address injustice, sort of followed that. And then 5 days after Mike Brown was killed, Michelle Cusseau was killed by the Phoenix police. And nobody said anything about it. No one knew her name. So Fran Garrett, who was her mother, as she said to me, somebody was going to recognize what had happened to my child. She marched her white casket to City Hall. We saw it, covered in the news. It was like a flare. Once we saw that, we couldn't unsee it. So we reached out to Fran, and we just started doing some research, and we found dozens of Black women who were killed, killed in their homes, killed in front of their children, killed driving while Black, having a mental health crisis while Black, driving. they were killed in many of the same circumstances that some of our brothers and sons were killed in, some that were actually different, with babies strapped in the back seat of the car. So we pulled them together. We invited them to come together. Many of them, we were the first people to call many of them. Many of them hadn't heard from anybody who was mobilizing, and organizing. And so we brought them together, and the one consistent thing was that the loss they had was lost to our community. Their loss, their grief was lost to us. So not only did they lose the loved one, the fact that they lost that loved one was lost to all of us. It was the one thing we could do something about. We could not do anything to bring them back, and for the most part, we were having a hard time seeking justice for them, but we could erase their erasure. We could say their names. And so that's where Say Her Name came from. We were marching in New York around the Eric Garner No Bill, and tens of thousands of people in New York were marching. And we were chanting, we're shutting it down for Mike Brown, we were doing all the chants. But we had a banner that had like the pictures of 12 black women who had been killed by the police. And we would start some chants saying, say her name. And I'll never forget, some people, gave us the thumbs up. Some people were just incredulous, like we didn't know that women were killed by the police. We didn't know that this was something that happened to black women in particular. And so they would just stop and stare. But there were some who were angry that we were inserting black women into a discourse that they thought was exclusively a discourse around black boys and black men, and wanted us to go and shut up. That's when we realized that this can't just be a march. This can't just be a poster or a tweet. It has to be a space. It has to be a movement. It has to be an imperative to say her name. So Say Her Name started then. Since then, we're in our 11th year of Say Her Name. We've done a play called Say Her Name, The Lives That Should Have Been, that imagined all these women together in another plane that matched how the mothers come together to support each other. Janelle Monáe did a song for us, What You Talking About, which was a chant with all the names. But the most important thing we do is bear witness for them. We do not look away. We create the space for them to touch each other. And I'll end with this. We are holding space. They do the work of mutual healing with each other. One of the mothers, Tanisha Anderson's mother, her name was Cassie. Tanisha was killed about a week before Tamir Rice was killed by the same police department that killed him. She was killed because she was having a mental health crisis, and the family called the police to come. Now, the problem with police coming, as we all know, mental health, to what's that saying? To a hammer, everything looks like a nail. Mm-hmm. To a police officer, everything looks like someone failing to comply. Mm. So they showed up and tried to force her into a car, which is the last thing you want to do to anyone who's having a mental health crisis. So she refused to get into the car. And so they did a takedown move on her and held her, held her until she could no longer breathe. And her family was forced to watch it as guns were being held on them. That level of trauma is unimaginable. Cassie held out hope that because the death was ruled a homicide, that somebody would ultimately pay. And she was also, she was very spiritual. And so she believed that justice would prevail. And after 3 years, these officers were finally cleared. And she found out watching on television. It just so happened that we were having another gathering of all of the mothers, so she came to that. And she was a shell of herself. I mean, you can look at a person and see when their spirit has been drained from them. She was almost unrecognizable. So she sat apart from the other women, you know, and when we get together, they cry, they drum, they dance, they sing, they do all sorts of things. The emotion just moves as they want to move. And while all of this is happening, you know, Cassie was seated apart. And at some point, she had a moment where she broke. And it was a prayer saying, God, what do you want from me? What am I to do? I didn't drink. I didn't do drugs. I didn't curse you. I didn't curse them. I believed, and here I am. What am I to do? And it kept going and getting more and more raw. And I was afraid that she was gonna have a stroke. I mean, it was that intense. And my staff and I didn't know what to do. We didn't know what to say. We didn't know how to touch her. We didn't know how to hold her. But those mothers, they all gathered around her. And they have vastly different traditions. We've got fundamentalist Baptists, we got New Agey people, we got them all in the mix. But they all had a way of putting their hands on her, all had a way of sharing that pain with her. And when it was over, and it lasted a while, but when it was over, it was like something had come back into her body. The next day, we were all standing around. I write this in the book. And again, Cassie was very, very religious, very, traditional fundamentalist. She didn't partake in any of the craziness that some of the other mothers did. But she said to them, hey, I got some weed. It's really good. And everybody was like, what? They were like shocked, and no one knew what to say. Like, I know everybody was saying, are you sure? Kat, what's happening? And she cracked up. She had oregano. But this is the love that they have for each other. This is how they're able to touch each other. I wish I could have held them together through COVID. But Cassie had another stroke just before COVID. And because of COVID, she was in a facility where the family could not visit. She ended up getting a bed sore that ended her life. So this was, on top of. So say her name, we count as the losses, not just the women who were killed by the police, but many of their survivors who did not survive that. Cassie is one of them.
Yeah. I mean, you talk about the we, those women and the support that just demonstrates we purely.
Yeah.
So you mentioned Janelle Monáe there.
Yeah.
And that is there's this soundtrack in this book. I will be making a playlist. And I just wanted to know if there was anything that didn't make it in, that you were like, any music, or just generally what music has meant to you, because your parents were musicians.
Right.
And there was a soundtrack to everything that you've experienced, and just wanted to hear about you.
Yeah.
How that's affected you.
One of the challenges of publishing, and you have a vision about how you want the book to go. I wanted each chapter, to begin with the soundtrack that I associate with the story. But it's really expensive to write lyrics. Look, I'm not trying to sell the song. I'm just, trying to bring, that feeling. When I hear a song, just like when I smell something, I feel like I felt when I heard that song. I feel like I felt when, one of the stories that's in there is about the Motown sound and how my family, you put Motown on and we're in the living room and we're dancing and we're singing and we're feeling that thing that was in the air. But nothing did that like James Brown. Say it loud, I'm black and I'm proud. I'm old enough to remember when it became okay to be black. A lot of people don't know this, but there was a time before that song came out where to be called black was fighting words. I remember that. And I remember when we first heard that beat and we hear the Godfather of Soul say it loud, I'm black and I'm proud. We're like, oh, we can say that? We can say that? And it was so, it's not just the sound of it, but it comes in your body. If you can move to it, if you can groove to it, you can bring the entire repositioning of who you are in the culture to bear. So music has always been magical for us. My parents ran a choir called the Canton Police Boys Club Choir. And what that choir did, it traveled all over Ohio. And again, this is in the early 60s, an integrated choir singing about harmony. The songs were, from Man of La Mancha. They were This Land Is Your Land. They were One World Built on a Firm Foundation. And these songs would just bring the house down. I could see people shedding, the distance between them because they were experiencing something in here and in here that music is able to create in ways that almost nothing else can really do. And then the two of them, my mother and my father, they would always do an encore. And the encore was usually my father would sing, "If I could help somebody, my living will not be in vain." That sticks with me. That was that was their mission statement, and they performed it, through music. So I would have wanted to have a lot more of the music that, is the soundtrack of my life. I think I have enough, to give folks, more or less a sense of how important, music was to me and why even in the work that we do, I have a social justice think tank, but a lot of what we do, we call it artivism. We use the arts, we use performance, we use music to activate left, right side of the brain. We think people have to understand, but they also have to feel. And a lot of, I think, where progressive politics have gone these days has been more of the transactional kind of, this is good if we agree, blah, blah, blah. People have to feel something. They have to feel righteous indignation about the conditions that they're trying to fight. They have to feel hope. They have to feel connection. They have to feel that it's part of their purpose. And art helps bring that in a way that discourse on its own, it can take you there, but it can't feel you in the same way that art can.
I'd love hearing about, you're connecting art to law. And you were very intentional. At some point you said, there are lots of ways to deal with race. My place is here.
Yeah.
You knew that was your place. And I wonder how you think about other disciplines and what they can contribute. I mean, we're in this time where we've got to get it all together, right? And so when you think of public health, public health has started to say, gun violence, police violence, it's a public health crisis. But who are there disciplines that you've been thinking, you guys got to focus on this and connect with us in the law so that we can work together? Have there been things you've been wanting to see?
What I've been wanting to see and what we were able to do to some degree before this big onslaught is to do in the disciplines what we did in critical race theory. You know, critical race theory is not just one subject. It is a thematic sort of framework for understanding the way that law both creates the things that it claims that it's merely regulating, right? Law creates race. It doesn't just merely, you know, it's not just a referee of pre-existing, you know, racial teams. It creates the teams, it creates the rules, it creates the ball, it creates all of it. But we came to that recognition because we were scholars who did torts and did contracts and did anti-discrimination law and property. And we were able to talk about how the law created the contours of race in each of those areas. So the knowledge came from aggregating all of the different projects in these different subdivisions of the law. That's how critical race theory kind of arose out of all these different projects. So we thought, well, why don't we do this across the discipline? Let's ask a question that each discipline has a take on. Each discipline has a tool that they might be able to use. And each discipline has a blind spot. And so as Claude Steele, the great psychologist said, we're looking for people who pray to their disciplinary gods with one eye open. And so we collected these people, you know, to come together, and the question was colorblindness. How does colorblindness disable us from actually being able to see the conditions of our lives in order to better transform it? And as it turns out, when people came to the table, each discipline played a role in rationalizing racial hierarchy. Anthropology. What was anthropology really about? You know? Psychology, psychometrics. Where did that really come from, right? Political science, sociology. Each of these disciplines has a story about how they were contributing to the maintenance of the status quo. So if we tell that story, understand how their tools can be useful, but also know that there's a tail to those tools that we don't want to fully engage. It is how do you think critically about your discipline while you deliver the tools that your discipline has for you. So our book is called Colorblindness Across the Discipline. Our project had been bringing folks together on a regular basis to actually apply our disciplinary tools to being a better service to the community that we live in. The university is not meant to be separate and apart. It's not meant to be a knowledge-producing institution that has nothing to do with the society it's helping to rationalize. If anything, it should do the opposite. So a lot of my thinking at this point is we had a good run for a couple of decades in trying to open up the university so its benefits were more broadly shared, so that its mission was seen in broader terms than it had been in the early part of the 20th century. And partly because of the success of that, the backlash against the university has just grown to gargantuan proportions. My good friend and mentor, you know, she says this about, you know, our work, but I think it applies to the university more broadly. Whenever I call her up and complain about some other effort to censor, some other effort to, you know, get rid of a course or a discipline, you know, I'll complain to her and she'll say, Kimberly, dogs don't bark at parked cars. What do you mean, Barbara? What are you saying? And what she's saying is because there was movement, because ideas and disciplines in the university was a vehicle to advance the efforts to make our democracy work, to advance efforts to deal with our history, to advance efforts to deal with, the way our institutions consistently produce some of the same outcomes. Because we were making that progress, and you talk about public health. We can talk about all sorts of projects that come out of that understanding. Because that was happening, that is precisely why the attack on the universities has been meant to disable what we have been doing. So part of what we've got to do is make the content and the projects that we do legible to stakeholders in the development of knowledge that enhances human dignity. And we haven't had as many opportunities to do that as we need in order to welcome people into supporting their universities and supporting knowledge. That's my wish for this moment.
Thank you. You heard that? Whatever your discipline is, yeah? Look for the blind spot, right? Look for the blind spot. Look how we're holding the status quo in place, right? So I know that we've given opportunity for people to ask questions. So while I think we're sorting that out, I will dig a little bit deeper into this one. I want to thank you for raising in the book the concept of weathering. It's something close to my heart. It's been a big part of my career. And I think, can you share your thoughts on how weathering and how it can inform the law or vice versa? Because there's just, this is where it's real. This is our bodies. This is, and the impact of racism on someone's body. And I'll give the example, I know you know this, is you could have a middle-class Black woman who's never used substances have a poorer birth outcome than a young white woman who's using substances.
That's
right. And we need to understand that in how we not only provide health care, but also how we protect Black women's bodies, other women of color who are starting to experience weathering more similarly. So I thank you for raising it. And then I asked, what do you think the relationship with the law is to this?
What I use that as an example to push back against one particularly corrosive framing of the dismantling of pretty much everything that our last couple of generations have tried to create. People have framed these attacks as a culture war, and it makes people think that there aren't real casualties. This is an attack on the body. This is an attack on real people's lives. People are dying because of this. So case in point, a lot of the research that Musk, pulled the plug on was research into the contours and the conditions of the problem that you just talked about, Black maternal mortality. That was distorted and framed as discriminatory. So research that was helping doctors and helping hospitals understand what were some of the ways that their practices were contributing to that. Research, that was created to understand the effect of stress. And then beyond that, research on environmental racism and the cancer alleys. All of that was explicitly designed to say, we see the problem, we need to understand the problem in order to better address the problem. All of that stuff got written out. And the media contribute to the misunderstanding because the media won't do the body count. So this is like any other war. When they try to suppress the body count, they do it by now saying, well, we have to be colorblind, so we're not even going to talk about the racialization of this erasure, who is actually suffering from it. So I don't call it a culture war anymore, any more than the Civil War. I mean, heck, the Civil War was a culture war, right? But we have to understand that when they're using culture war, and we're not saying it's a war that has real consequences. People are dying. If we lean into to telling the truth about it, I think it helps pull back the curtain and we can see what actually is at stake, see the bodies lining up.
Thank you. All right. Thank you. Let's see what we have. As a Black woman, how do you cope with living in a world where everyone sees us as angry, rebellious, uncontrollable, or too much? Especially curious about how you handle authority figures who are threatened by you. Thank you. Thank you. Mm-hmm.
You know, that is, that is the question for so many of us. And you know, I'm not sure if I have figured it out. I mean, you know, partly I don't deny that I have a lot to be angry about. So I don't take I'm going to be, miscongeniality. I definitely don't do that. I think the most important thing for me is it not internalizing what they project upon me. So I don't want to say, oh no, I'm not that person, and I don't want to suggest that that there is not a good reason for them to pay attention to where the source of my anger is. I will say this, and I learned this. It was another epiphany. We often think that the discrimination that we face or the way that we are read is a product of the belief on the part of a lot of people that we don't deserve to be where we are or that we are not worthy. But I came to find out it's not just that. Some of the worst experiences I've had is when I've been successful. So I had this store teacher one time. He was a colleague of mine. I was walking down the hallway, and he asked me what I was doing in the summer. I said, I'm publishing my article, the Harvard Law Review article that Bert Voorhees was my research assistant on, my first article. And he says, oh, that manuscript that you're working on, has it been accepted, by a publisher? And I said, yes. And he said, well, where? And I said, Harvard. And he said, Howard. I said, Harvard. He said, and a look came over his face. It was partly astonishment, but it was something else, and I couldn't read what that was. And then he said, why don't you come into my class and say hello to them? He was teaching a group of students that I had taught the semester before. That's the last thing I wanted to do, but he was, a senior person. He was, basically, when you're untenured, you've got to do what they tell you to do. So I go into the classroom. He has me sit right in the front, and he says to the class, so it seems Professor Crenshaw has gotten some very good news recently. Her manuscript has been accepted for publication in the Harvard Law Review. Let's all give her a hand. So he does this, and, the students are like, okay, so they clap. And then he says, of course, now you know why she was never prepared for class last semester. And I'm like, what? What just happened here? What just happened here? So there are very many layers, to what this story is about. But the most important layer is that it's not that, there's doubt about whether you can succeed. There's a place that you're supposed to stay in. And when you start climbing out of that box, it implicates their own sense of what they are supposed to have, their own sense that I should have been published in the Harvard. And if you were, then there's something wrong, and I've got to try to put you back in your place. So I do get angry about that. It's a legitimate anger about it. And I also know that there are ways in which my success is triggering to people. So understanding where it comes from, is the most that I can say. This is how I try to deal with it.
Thank you. Let's see. What is the key takeaway from your stories for young people? What do they need to know to have hope?
One of the key takeaways is that some of the things that you think now, you'll probably always be thinking. Some of the ways that you engage in the world, some of the experiences that you are having, you are going to find that they shape you, they stay with you, they provide epiphanies for you over the course of your life. What I liked about writing the book is discovering that she's still with me. That sort of, that precociousness, that sense of being protected, by my family. I fell in love with me again. And so I think taking seriously that you are a fully formed person right now. The things that you're thinking about experiencing, they are real right now. I wish that I had written more about what I was thinking, because I went and found my diaries, and they are like line and verse about this happened and that happened and blah, blah, blah. It's like, oh my gosh, I see the full arc there. And it's such a gift to know yourself and to lay out the breadcrumbs for yourself so you can always find your way back.
Yeah. Wonderful. Yes. Okay. So, how does an intersectional analysis explain the historical and structural roots of Black and brown tensions and anti-Black entitlement? And anti-Black entitlement within the Latino community, and how does Backtalker reframe those dynamics and point to a concrete solution? I think I got it.
How does my memoir point to a concrete solution to Black-brown tension? It doesn't. I mean, it doesn't, right?
Or reframe the dynamics.
It doesn't.
Yeah, okay.
So I'm going to say this. I get asked a lot about, does intersectionality do this? Does intersectionality do that? I'm a big fan of, do a throwback, I'm a big fan of the Flintstones. And I remember when, one of their appliances were always animals and stuff, and they would say, we don't do windows or stuff like that. People often treat intersectionality like it's a thing, and it decides what it does and doesn't do. It's a framework that people decide what they want to do with it, right? And when we were talking about the disciplines, people will study what interests them, what their mission is. I don't insist. It's never been, my thing to say, if it's not intersectional, it's not worth studying. That's not what I believe. I believe that we learn what intersectionality is and does from what people do with it. Do I think that there are ways that intersectionality can be used to shed light on Black-brown tension among those who are working on that area, who are historicizing the area, who are theorizing it? Probably. Do I think that about hundreds of issues? Yes. I am a student of what people do with intersectionality. A student. And so I want to make it clear that this is the framework that I've used to think about the life that I've led, the things that I see. And sometimes that gives me some purchase on other people's projects or the things that they think about. But I don't want to occupy the space of being the intersectional guru. I'm not. You know, there's a certain number of things that I think about a lot. There's certain things that I think about sometimes. There's certain things that I don't, have the bandwidth to really think about. But I love it that other people are using these frameworks to illuminate and help them articulate what their projects are. So just, I just came back from book tour from, Germany and Northern Ireland, and, Paris and places like that. And the projects that people are coming to me with to say, my dissertation was about X and Y, and I used your framework. I was like, really? I really want to read it. I really want to learn, like, how did intersectionality help you think about? We have a guy that studies oceanography. And he swears up and down that intersectionality opened up an entire, project for him studying the ocean. I'm like, okay. I'm really happy to hear that. I'm really, So I would like, whoever is working on that, whoever asked that question, I have a hunch that they have an idea. I want to know what their idea is.
You get inspiration where you can find it, right? All right, one more, and I know we want to give an opportunity also. There will be an opportunity to have books signed, and so we'll do this one. It looks like it says somebody's name. When our descent back down into Jim Crow 2.0, what do you say to those, I'm sorry that I'm not getting it right, those activists, militants, the Asada Shakuras who are sick of it all? As you say, the drinks suck anyway. Why should we continue to stay and fight for a country and a flag that refuses to stand for us? Why not execute Plan B and leave to anywhere better than here?
Yeah, I mean, that is the existential question, right? I have a different answer to that now than I did before. It used to be a tougher question, for me, when there was a sense that there was a here and a there, and there was a difference between a here and a there. Mm-hmm. I think what we're looking at right now is that, this thing that we're fighting is global. Every now and then, I'm having I had a conversation with somebody yesterday about where are we going? Where are we going to go? Where are we going to go? Panama, Portugal, But if anything that we've learned, we're running countries now. We're running countries now. This administration is running countries now. The idea that there is some kind of escape, I don't believe it as much. Now, I do think this, because one of my friends is in Portugal now, and we were saying, it's not as though these isms aren't playing out pretty much everywhere, but we're relatively unable to read it as closely as we can read our own. So in some ways, when you're in a different place, you're kind of, exempt from some of it. And there also, especially when it comes to racism, I think especially when it comes to anti-Blackness, I want to put this carefully. There is a way that being an exotic version in a different place gives you a little bit more space than when you're the domestic version. And it happens all the way around. So when I go to France, before I speak, I'm pretty much treated like, folks from Africa, folks from the Caribbean who are part of the French colonial project. When I speak, I become an American. Now, I'm not made more popular by that, but I don't get, there's just a difference. Sarah Jones, who is an amazing artist, she has a whole piece on this in which she begins speaking in a British accent. And for everybody who doesn't know that she's not British, and she tells everyone, if you've seen me perform before, shut up, don't tell them. Right? And then she goes and does this whole thing in a British accent. And in the end, she talks about, because of this distinction, because of my ability to put on this persona, I actually did this for several months in New York City. My dating life was different, my employment was different, my casting was different. There was like a recognition that being an other is different. So I want to acknowledge that escaping some dimensions of this might be attractive. But the overall project right now is a billionaire. We're going to control the entire society, and presidents are basically just our CEOs. We are, we are the shareholders, and there are only a couple hundred of us, maybe a couple thousand, and all of us in the end are going to be suffering. So it's sort of a question of where you want to put your bucket down and fight. Now, I will say this as a last thing. I'm not a big believer in the reform revolution dichotomy. I do think that the law is getting to a point where even our ability to say some dimension of law has to be engaged to protect us from the worst. The worst stuff is happening right now. So a lot of us are trying to think about what that means. I'm not one that thinks we can abandon it, because just because you ignore the law doesn't mean the law is going to ignore you. That's the history that we know. The only thing that I come to is something that I have been saying for a long time. We want stakeholders in racial justice and democracy to understand how the law works. We want it to be as important an issue around why we vote as it has been traditionally on the part of the right. The right has been voting to take over the Supreme Court since Brown versus Board of Education. It's been like 1 or 2 on their list. For us, it's like 20. We don't even, our elected officials, we don't even talk about it. This is the consequence of that. So if we're going to claw our way back, we've got to start politicizing and explaining how law functions, how courts enable certain things and disable others. We've got to fight for substance, not just do we want an activist court or not. We need to talk about, we want a court that's going to affirm rights. We want a court that's going to do these specific things. And so far, I think we're in a period of time where the folks that we're likely to elect have not yet gotten the memo that this is how they're going to have to engage this issue from here on in.
Thank you. Yeah, please.
I'm gonna do a selfie. Shall we do a selfie? Selfie. Okay.
Thank you for that. I do want to ask, in relation to what you just said, if people want to get involved with the work of the African American Policy Forum.
Yes.
What's the best way? What's the best way?
Best
for people
way.
To do it? Yeah.
Go to aapf.org. and you can see all of our projects. As I said, I'm really excited about our workshop that we're having. Do we have that? In Montgomery next Monday. So if you just happen to be looking for, a travel idea, come join us with, several amazing scholars, activists to, how many people have been to the legacy sites in Montgomery? Is it amazing? It is absolutely amazing. So if you ever, thought you wanted to go, this is a time to go, because we're going to collectivize, we're going to go together, we're going to talk about what the exhibits mean, we're going to engage in artivism. Brian and I are going to have an evening together where people are actually going to perform out of our collective memoirs. So, it's kind of a pilgrimage. We think we should start creating the idea of a pilgrimage to sacred space, and Montgomery is sacred space. So, yeah.
Professor Crenshaw, we're trying to get a little. Okay, we'll see if we can work on that. I'll filibuster for a moment for you. Thank you so much for being generous with your story, with your wisdom, for informing us, challenging us, inspiring us. Thank you so very much for being here. If you want to be more informed and inspired, then there are books over there to be purchased. How'd you like that segue there? There are books to be purchased. Professor Crenshaw will be also signing books. We've got volunteers over there who will help kind of keep this an organized process. And so please, there are books, and then there are other materials over there. Please make your way over to the side where you can purchase them. And one more time, would you please join me in thanking, first of all, Barbara Andrade Dubronsky and Professor Kimberlé Crenshaw. Thank you so much. Have a good night, everyone.
Thank you, Barbara. That was wonderful.